program and some package of information available at the door if you missed it on your way in. Thank you for coming out. My name is Melissa Paley. I am the Great Bay Piscataqua Waterkeeper, and I work for the Conservation Law Foundation. I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's workshop about what kinds of athletic fields are the best choice for the health of our kids and our community. I want to offer a couple of thanks right off the start, especially to Ted Jankowski, who really organized this event. Ted has been a real leader in the community, I'm sure you all know, trying to find all kinds of ways to reduce the amount of toxics that are in our water and exposed to our residents and our pets and other things. Ted was the driving force behind the passage of a resolution in Portsmouth recently, last fall, to eliminate the use of toxic pesticides in publicly owned parks, streetscapes, and so on in Portsmouth. And so the continuation of the effort to reduce toxics in our community is something that we're going to talk about tonight as the city considers what kind of material to use to build out a sports field on Route 33, the old stump dump, as it's fondly referred to. But why is the Waterkeeper introducing this program? Let me just give you a very quick rundown of how this relates in the larger context within which I view this issue. I had a great opportunity this fall to fly over the estuary, and from up above, it's really clear how water completely dominates the landscape of the communities that we call home here in the Seacoast region. It's beautiful from above, it's beautiful from the surface. I'm very fortunate to have a Waterkeeper boat, and I invite you to come out with me if you want to have an opportunity to see the landscape at eye level, at sea level, and to see what a remarkable place this is that we call home, that we enjoy for work, for play, and for a place to raise our families and so on. It's a very complicated system, this estuary that we live in. We have 7 rivers, tidal rivers, that flow into Little Bay, Great Bay, and then down the main stem of the Piscataqua. And twice a day, because the tide goes in and out twice a day, we have a great mixing of salt water and fresh water. And virtually everything that we do to the land ends up in water and sloshes back and forth twice a day through this system. We have 52 communities in this estuary, 42 in New Hampshire, 10 in Maine, so we're dealing with 2 states, 2 different sets of regulatory environments, 52 different municipal codes, planning boards, town councils, city councils, recreation boards, you name it. I think you get the idea that this is an enormously complicated resource that we have here and is subject to many, many threats. It's a great mix of land use here. This is, probably can't see it because the lights are up. Maybe we could turn down some of the lights. But what you'll notice is that we have rural landscapes along Durham, Newmarket. This is Great Bay, Little Bay. We have Pease, Tradeport, the 2-mile airstrip smack dab in the middle of Newington. We have a great industrial development along the Piscataqua. So we have a real mix. We have every conceivable kind of land use in this estuary of ours. When an estuary is healthy, it has an abundance of seagrass. This type of seagrass is called eelgrass. And this really is the foundation of a healthy estuary. It's a place that provides home, a nursery for fish, for shellfish. It's a habitat for plants and animals. It sequesters carbon. It holds silt from blowing up, from making our estuary very turbid. I think we probably need a little more light.
Yeah, for the speaker. I need some on the speaker.
Yeah.
Some light?
Yeah. We are taping it too, so we want to make sure that other people who aren't here tonight can also.
Those are the choices.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I think you'll get the gist. Anyway, a healthy estuary with an abundance of eelgrass is really the foundation of what makes the system tick. It makes fishing opportunities like this, oysters. We have a robust oyster industry and burgeoning aquaculture industry in the estuary. But when the estuary is not healthy, eelgrass gets a blight that looks like this, and then that's what happens. And you end up in a system that can no longer, that's not clear, light can't penetrate, sediment gets all stirred up every time the wind blows and the currents blow, and we end up with mats of algae, other seaweeds, nuisance seaweeds and macroalgae that outcompete the eelgrass. And we have a system that may look pretty at the surface, but really does not function well. And that's really the status of our estuary today. We have pollution coming from all sorts of places. It's not just one, there's no silver bullet here, but we have wastewater coming in from wastewater treatment plants and septic systems. We have atmospheric pollution. We have lots of roads, pavement, parking lots, pet waste, farms, fertilizers, all the kinds of things that, as we say, everything we do on the land ends up in the water. This is, a little, many people think if a little bit of fertilizer in your lawn is good, then a lot's better. Same with pesticides, trying to keep, these landscapes, artificial landscapes that we have, free of insects. But when it rains, a lot of those chemicals end up washing into little streams, into wetlands, and eventually into our rivers and bays, creating a hazardous environment. This report that was just released in December shows that we have a system in decline. And out of 16 indicators that are measured, we're only doing sort of reasonably well on 4 of them. So what does all that have to do with the ball field on Route 33 at the stump dump? I think the point is that this is one relatively small land use, but it sits within a larger context. Here's the aerial photo. I'm going to point out right here. This is the site right in here, with 95 going up. This is Route 33, Peverly Hill Road, and this site, the water from this site will run off. It's, as far as I can tell, I believe it is in the very far northwest corner of the Sagamore Creek watershed, way up here, in that little corner there. So what runs off of this site will eventually end up in Sagamore Creek in Little Harbor. Sagamore Creek is an impaired waterway, according to the New Hampshire DES. So it's part of the system that is compromised by pollution and one that needs to be restored. The impacts on the surface water are one thing to be concerned about. The site also sits on the eastern edge of the aquifer that flows underneath the eastern end of the Pease Trade Port, right here. This dark blue shows the depth of the stratified drift aquifer, and right there in that circular area sits the Collins Well. Right here is the Collins Well. The site is right in here. So we have impacts not only to surface water, but a site here that we develop, however we choose to do it, that could possibly have an impact on one of the city's drinking water wells that's about 400 or 500 feet from the edge of the site. So we have multiple reasons to be concerned about the choices that we make at this site. Here's another map of groundwater. This is the Collins Well right there. This is the site. So you can see that the groundwater that will flow right from under the site may be in contact with the well. We haven't done a detailed groundwater study, so we don't know, but there is reason to be concerned that the proximity of this site and a well is something to look into. So there we have it. We want to put out some information for you all to consider tonight. have some experts who know a whole lot more about the subject than I do, and make an informed choice about what we do with the site, and one that is going to be most protective of the health of both people and our estuary. So with that, I am going to cue up 2 short videos before we introduce our speaker, Rachel Massey, from the Toxics Use Reduction Institute.
Massey from the Massachusetts Toxic Reduction Institute.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Rachel Massey. It's very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you. I work at the Massachusetts Toxics Use Reduction Institute. We're located in Lowell, Massachusetts, and we're one of the implementing agencies of the Massachusetts Toxics Use Reduction Act. We're one of 3 implementing agencies which are listed here. And so all the work that we do is founded on the concept of toxics use reduction. So we focus on inherent hazard of chemicals, whether a chemical causes cancer or is neurotoxic, for example. We look at options to reduce the use of toxic chemicals as a way to protect human health and the environment. And as part of that, we try to assess alternatives to avoid regrettable substitutions, where you might move away from one option that you know is toxic and then switch to some other option that also turns out to be toxic and you just didn't have as much information about it. And through all of that work, we look for efficiencies and opportunities for cost savings. And in the work that we do in Massachusetts, businesses and communities, we often find that you can both reduce or eliminate toxics and find savings. So how did we get to be involved in the sports field issue? It's kind of 2 strands. So one is that as part of our mandate to provide assistance to communities, we've done work over the years to support projects related to organic management of grass, both in people's homes and in public lands. And you'll hear more about that from Chip Osborne in a little while. And then the other thing is that we started getting a lot of queries from Massachusetts municipalities and universities who needed information as they were trying to make decisions about sports fields, so we decided we should try to research it to be able to better answer their questions. And we decided to design it roughly as what we call an alternatives assessment. This is something that's usually done to compare one chemical with other chemicals, so this is a little different because it's, comparing one whole system with another, but we tried to apply some of that approach. So what I'll share with you today is just a little bit of background about tire, crumb, and artificial turf, and then a few of the factors that we've looked at from this kind of alternatives assessment angle, with a particular focus on the artificial turf infills, because that's what we've gotten a lot of questions about, and then we'll end up with a couple of videos. And I'm going to try to rush through a couple of the slides, so if I go by something that you have questions about, we can go back to it at the end. Okay, so what's the relationship between the image at the bottom there, which is a tire crumb manufacturing facility, and the image at the top, which is a playing field using tire crumb? Well, it kind of starts with the fact that tires are sort of a difficult material to manage. Tires are hard to recycle because they're made from a material that you can melt down and form into a tire, but then it's a curing process, and so you can't melt it down at the end. So you can't just take a whole bunch of tires and melt them and make new tires. You can use some waste tire material in a new tire, but it can only be a certain percentage, or you can retread tires. So there are ways to do it, but basically tires are a difficult waste material to deal with. And then they're also difficult to dispose of. So in landfills, if you put whole tires in landfills, they float up to the surface and kind of cause problems. They can also catch fire, and the fires are extremely difficult to put out, and they leach. They can leach toxic substances out into the runoff. Nearly every state has restrictions or bans on landfilling tires. So as a result, there's this large supply of waste tire material and an ongoing active effort to find places to put those tires. So, I'm sorry about that. So then where does the artificial turf strand come in? In the 1960s, artificial turf was first introduced as a product. It was basically just a kind of green carpet. It didn't have anything to make it soft or squishy. But then in the 1990s, this sand and rubber infill mix was introduced, which made it much, changed the surface, the playing surface, and it became a really significant place to put tires. So accounting for a significant fraction of all the tires being pulled out of use each year. There are a number of components to artificial turf. There's the pad, the underlayment, the fibers, the infill. We haven't researched all of them. I do think they're all important and they're all worthy of research. Some of the considerations for all these materials include what's the material composition, what's in it, what is most readily released from that material, to the extent that it's particles, where are those particles migrating? Because as we probably all know, they don't stay just in the field, they migrate to the surrounding environment. So we started looking into the infills, so this is a list of some of the infills that we started looking into. I'm sure there are others beyond this, but so there are synthetic infills, there are mineral or plant-based options, and then there are combinations. Some of the kind of key concepts as we're looking at this, first of all, there are multiple materials in each category. So if you find out that you're looking at an infill and it's TPE, for example, which is thermoplastic elastomer, that's just your starting point. It's not the answer. It's just the starting point for more questions because there are a lot of different materials that could be considered TPE. Another thing is that all these materials have a lot of additives. So it's not just a matter of understanding what the basic polymer is, it's a matter of finding out what all materials are that have been added to it. And then this is maybe a little more technical than we need, but some of them are thermosets and some are thermoplastics. So the thermosets are the things that cannot be melted after they're formed, like tires and some of the other materials have that characteristic, whereas thermoplastics are materials that can be melted down and reused. Let's see, well, okay, I'll just move on to there. Okay, so what's in, so I've got a number of slides now about tire crumb, because this is what we get a lot of questions about. What's in tire crumb infill? So EPA has done a really good job of reviewing this literature. So I just summarized this from an EPA publication. So the categories, so there are metals such as lead or zinc. There are volatile organic compounds or VOCs, such as benzene, that's one that people have heard of. There are polyaromatic hydrocarbons or PAHs. I highlighted benzene, which is just one example. That one is a carcinogen. There are phthalates. You may have heard of phthalates. They're used as plasticizers. They're added to make materials more pliable or squishy. So some of those are found in this material. And then there are lots of other materials such as molecules that are added in the curing process. And then what are the health and environmental endpoints that we need to think about? So one of them is carcinogenicity. A number of the chemicals that are found in tire crumb are either known or suspected human carcinogens. For example, some of those volatile organic compounds such as benzene and a number of the polyaromatic hydrocarbons. There are also neurotoxic chemicals, of which lead is the one that is best known. There are also endocrine disrupting chemicals such as the phthalates I just mentioned. If you don't already know what an endocrine disruptor is, it's a chemical that either acts like a hormone in the human body or somehow disrupts the action of the hormones that are there. And then one of the environmental factors to think about is aquatic toxicity, and one of the things that's been highlighted is there are high levels of zinc in tire crumb and also in other cured rubber compounds, and so that can end up in the runoff. Routes of exposure can include, you can breathe some of these chemicals, you can absorb them through your skin, or they can be ingested. I pulled this from a fact sheet from the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. These are some suggestions for tips for safer play on artificial surfaces. It includes avoiding use on very hot days, cleaning cuts and abrasions immediately, washing hands before eating or drinking or adjusting a mouth guard, and other things like that. And I actually should have put this slide a little later because I think those recommendations would apply equally to some of the other infills. It's not, that's not necessarily just for tire crumb. So one of the things that, if you are kind of following this debate, one of the things you hear often is there have been lots and lots of studies of tire crumb. And it's true that there have been a lot of studies, but I think it's important to understand what those studies are and what they are not. Studies are materials characterization, which means figuring out what's in the material. So a few of them are exposure studies. Those have been very limited. So there's one study that was a handful of adults playing on a field for a couple of hours, and then their urine was tested for a limited number of chemicals. So very, very limited studies. Overall, the exposure research really has not been done yet. And then a lot of them are risk assessments. And again, if you don't already know what a risk assessment is, it's basically a systematic way of making a bunch of guesses based on information that you have. So you take the information that you have about the chemicals that are present, and you make some estimates about exposures that could occur, and then how that would be processed by the body, and you come out with an estimate of number of cases of disease that could result. So it's an estimate, and there are a number of those. The thing that has not been done is there are no epidemiological studies. So that means there are no studies that have actually looked at people who are exposed to artificial turf fields and looked at what their disease patterns are, or conversely looking at people who have a certain set of diseases and seeing what their exposures have been. So that science just is absent. Some interesting work is ongoing. So some federal agencies, including the EPA and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, started at the beginning of 2016 to do a study to really just pull all this information together, because they recognized that there were so many questions coming from communities and they were not in a position to answer them very effectively. So they have redone all that materials characterization to verify what's in the material, and they're now looking at doing exposure studies. And they're also working with some agencies in California that are also hoping eventually to get exposure data. And there are also some independent researchers at universities who are also starting that exposure research. Interestingly, there's also a lot of work happening on this in the European Union, and one piece that I found out about recently is that the government agency in the Netherlands is preparing a proposal that would restrict the level of PAHs that are allowed in infill. So that'll be a really interesting piece to follow. Okay, so we've got a lot of questions about these other infills, and now I'll shift gears away from the tire crumb. And I'm going to run through this a bit quickly, and I hope it won't put you to sleep, but also I hope, if you have more questions, you can let me know, or you can look on our website for more detail. So one of them is EPDM rubber. It's also a thermoset. It can be mixed with high levels of additives. It can be up to 50% other materials other than the polymer. There's one study that was done in 2004 that compared it with tire crumb and found overall lower levels of hazardous substances, except for two metals, chromium and zinc. Another one is the TPE, or thermoplastic elastomer. That's one of those broad categories. Again, there's one study that we were able to find that overall found lower levels of most of the hazardous substances they looked for, but in the end they said they didn't really know what else was in the material, so they couldn't make a final recommendation. There are infills made from waste athletic shoe materials, and there's some literature on skin sensitizers that can be present in some of those materials. But on the other hand, most of the shoe manufacturers have made certain commitments about a list of toxic chemicals that will not be present in their materials. So some of those chemicals of concern are probably absent, but then others are going to be present. And then there's acrylic-coated sand, and I do want to kind of have a little take-home message on this one based on an experience in Massachusetts. This is marketed as, so it's sand coated with an acrylic and infused with microban, which is an antimicrobial. That's a trade name for a number of antimicrobials, including triclosan and triclocarban, if you've ever run across those. Anyway, these are highly, these are chemicals of high concern. They're persistent, they're bioaccumulative, they have ecotoxicity and human toxicity. And so this was a case in which actually when we got this query from a Massachusetts municipality, we suggested to them that they go back to the vendor and ask if they could get a version of this that didn't have the antimicrobial. And they were able to do that. So they had already made the commitment that they were going to purchase this infill, but at least they got it without that persistent antimicrobial. So that's, you know, just one good lesson, I think, to think about if anybody's dealing with that material. And then finally, there are these plant-based infills. So some of them contain a mix of cork and coconut hulls. Some of them contain walnut shells. They also can contain some mineral elements, including zeolite, which is a respiratory hazard. And it might be the case that these infills have many fewer toxic chemicals in them compared to some of these others, but the testing hasn't been done, so it's really, there's just a lot of questions about them, and primarily questions about respiratory hazards, including cork could potentially develop mold, and then is that a respiratory hazard, and they could potentially generate dust. Anyway, lots more questions than answers about this. So I just have one slide about heat, but I think this is also just a really important piece of the story. And this is less our specialty since we're focused on toxics, but all artificial turf gets significantly hotter than grass. And you heard some statistics in the video. You know, so figures like, you know, 156 degrees Fahrenheit under direct sunlight. So this creates a very immediate hazard of heat-related illness among children, and I think you know, what the experts on this are saying is that it's really essential, really important for coaches and other decision makers to be very well educated about heat-related illness and to know that they need to cancel games on hot days, and they need to know the signs of heat-related illness because it can be lethal. Injuries, we took a look at the literature on this. It's, you know, kind of mixed evidence on a number of injuries. The one thing that's really clear is that there's a higher level of skin abrasions, and so you have to be vigilant about skin infections. And then other environmental considerations include migration of the particles, as I mentioned, effect on green space, so it is green in color, but it's not green space. It doesn't provide that resource for wildlife. And then other ecosystem services like, you know, the filtration of water. So what our institute is working to promote natural grass as a safer alternative, and we've been working with a number of Massachusetts municipalities to support their work to do organic management of natural grass with support from Chip Osborne. And finally, just a few words about costs. So we did an analysis where we looked at all the literature we could find comparing costs of grass versus costs of artificial turf. And basically in all the scenarios, the life cycle cost of the artificial turf is higher than that of natural grass for an equivalent area. And you know, there are a lot of factors that are going to go into the costs in any given situation, but with the artificial turf, you have the installation cost, you have the maintenance over time, and then you have the disposal and then reinstallation. Whereas with natural grass, you don't have all those elements. So I know, you know, Chip will share more details about that. We have resources on our website. We have a compilation of relevant literature, and then we have the detailed documents that we've written about the infills and about the costs and about the heat and the injuries. So you can go to our website if you'd like more details. And my contact information is there, and I think I will, I guess the next step is a couple more videos. Shall I see if I can just make this one start? Let's see if this works. Or, well, maybe I should pretend to.
And organics, and this is a great lead-in because Chip was the one that assisted the city of Springfield in establishing their organic program.
Thank you, Ken. Good evening. Thank you for having me. My pleasure to be here and talk about a little of the realities. Just very quickly, my background, you may say, what right do I have to get up here and stand and talk to you about this? 45 years horticulturist, 25 years big pesticide user. The last 25 years, all organic. Because I was on a treadmill with pesticides and they just don't work. Pesticides treat a symptom, they never solve a problem. So if you have a bare spot in that soccer goal, the bare spot's not the problem. The problem is it's so compacted that the grass simply can't grow. 20 years ago, I started getting into turf grass management as my horticultural specialty, dealing with sports turf. And I started this business as a consulting business back around 2004, 2005, because I had to teach myself how to do organic, because university, cooperative extension really was not, and still not, is really interested in it all that much. The realities of some of this is I'm just a consultant, not a product guy, not a service guy. One of the things that happens in synthetic turf is when you bring a consultant in to address a municipality, that consultant is selling you the field. So there's a vested interest in that. So that's a little different than an independent consultant making suggestions. Let me just, before I get into it, my focus is going to be to talk to you about how organic grass is doable. And you'll see pictures, and I will end with the exact cost that it did in Springfield in year 1, year 2, and year 3. And how we did it and where we went from it. But just a couple comments on synthetic turf. Rachel made the reference to risk assessment. And that's really what it is, risk versus benefit. If the risk outweighs the benefit, the EPA doesn't let things come to the market, for pesticides, but if benefit outweighs the risk, something comes to market. It's really difficult to do a cost-benefit, or not a cost-benefit, but a risk-benefit analysis on synthetic turf if you take that 24/7 play off the table, and that's the driving factor. Is that we can play in the rain, we can play in the snow, we can plow it off. There's no such thing as a rain out, no scheduled games. But my town has one. And you know what? 10 months into it, we had a thunderstorm, all the rubber infill floated to the surface, mounted across the field, and they had to shut it down until it could be corrected. So there are rainouts. The other thing that I do is I'm an elected public official, and for 15 years have chaired the Town Marblehead Recreation and Park Commission. And so it's my responsibility to manage all the athletic fields, and I manage a synthetic field. The town voted 4-1 not to put in a synthetic field, but money was privately raised and donated to the school, and now we have one. So it's my job to take care of it, so I can tell you the exact cost that it takes to take care of it and all the things that we deal with. One of the big selling points for the industry that builds synthetic fields is that you don't have to use pesticides anymore like you do to grow grass. And you save money on irrigation. But you heard Rachel tell you about the heat. Synthetic fields are now designed with irrigation on the perimeter to go into the middle to cool it. And that cooling lasts for about 15 minutes on a hot day. You have to disinfect a synthetic field at least once, if not twice a year. The disinfecting products that they use, as Rachel mentioned, are antimicrobial. Those are pesticides. The common disinfectant for synthetic turf contains 5 known human carcinogens. So now you have that issue that you have to budget for and that you have to become aware of. Athletes don't like them. I could bring in high school kids to talk to you about how they don't like playing on synthetic fields. They'd rather have grass. 80% of the National Football League athletes think that synthetic turf shortens their career and leads to injuries. It's the owners that wanted it. It's really not the athletes themselves. In a municipality, it really comes down to the decision makers and coaches for the 24/7 play, but the reality is they're not entirely embraced by everybody as a really desirable place to play. I know that the consultant here in Springfield talked about you can get 3,000 hours of use from a synthetic field, and that's a little bit misleading because you're not scheduling or programming December, January, and February. So there's no way that in the actual playing time of the year, even if you bump use up to March and end it in the end of November, there's no way that you're going to hit 3,000 hours. And that same report said that a grass field can only take 100 to 200 hours of use a year. So I will show you pictures that will sort of debunk that, that myth. The other thing that you have to understand with synthetic fields is 1 hour of use is not equal across the board. So once you get a synthetic field in place, you get an owner's manual. And in that owner's manual, it tells you that you have to groom that field every 60 hours of use. 1 hour of use equals a gym class. 1 hour of a football game equals 3 hours of field use. So a 2.5 hour football game is 7.5 hours of use. 1 hour of a soccer game equals 2 hours of use. 1 hour of a lacrosse game is 3 hours of use because of the level of intensity that is happening on those fields. So for us in Marblehead on our field, that 60 hours happens every 21 days. So we have somebody on there every 21 days grooming that field, and then twice a year we have to disinfect it, because what happens in that infill, you get just the particulate organic matter that comes down from the atmosphere. You get leaves blow on it. If you go to one of the natural infills, that's all organic material that breaks down, decomposes, and can grow staph and MRSA because it's a biological system happening down there, even though those blades are synthetic. So that's all sort of those little things that maybe not heard before, but that really happen. So let's look at grass. This is why you don't use pesticides. Because you get that, what is, I don't know why this is flipping itself over here. So the idea that somebody's out there putting that kind of a pesticide down and they tell you as soon as it's dry to the touch it's okay. But every pesticide has something called a half-life. How long does it take for half of that stuff to go away? And a lot of the stuff that cities and towns are using on athletic fields have half-lives of 20, 30, 40 days. So it's designed to stay there for a long time. So whether it's dry doesn't really matter. If you look at the risk assessment on pesticides, it's really a no-brainer. I'll just make one comment that I get all the time, that how can pesticides be bad? Because they all have an EPA registration number. The EPA wouldn't register it because if it wasn't safe. The EPA, that registration number has no implication of safety. It's put in that same risk-benefit model. Benefit outweighs the risk. Comes to market. Risk outweighs the benefit, it doesn't. But all these pesticides are regulated and analyzed based on legislation that was created in 1972, and it's never been updated. So the manufacturer tests the pesticides, the manufacturer or subcontract. EPA doesn't test anything. They're in Washington dressed just like this, and they look at paperwork. And then they make an assessment, and then it's all based on lethal dose. How much does it take to kill that laboratory animal? Well, what we know for a fact now, and Rachel touched on it, endocrine disruption and all these other things, that happens at minute doses, repeated low-dose exposures over many years to a developing child. Way more toxic than a lethal dose. So all of the testing protocols that are in place right now in the EPA are irrelevant. One of the things I do every fall, I get to go to the EPA and sit down with them in Washington and talk. And this year, for the first time, they told us that they feel that they have to provide benefit to the registrant. How crazy is that? They have to give a benefit to the chemical manufacturer. More important to them maybe than what they're doing as a protective benefit to us. So that's my 2 minutes on pesticides, and that leads into why we should go organic. When we decide that we want to do a natural field, it really begins with the soil. We're taking a feed the soil approach. As a society, it's been drummed into our heads for 100 years that all you have to do in a horticultural system is pound it up with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and you can grow anything. So basically, all our land management is based around that. And the soil really has little to do with it. It's the microbial life in the soil that nature put there that's making things grow. So if we want to manage an athletic field, all we have to do is to look to a natural system and mimic what's happening there, because nature's got it right. But we think now, since the chemical age started in the 1940s, that we know better than nature. Chemicals bypass all of that living life in the soil. Our programs begin with that life in the soil. Penn State proposed that conventionally, this is how we look at soils. Structure is sand, silt, and clay, and that unique makeup in every region of the country. The chemistry is the pH, the organic matter fraction, the ability of the soil to hold on to nutrients, the nutrients themselves. And then the biological are those microbes down there that are sort of doing their thing. And if we have an organic fertilizer and we put it down on the ground, it won't work unless a bacterial organism breaks it down. And then that bacterial organism gets that nitrogen in it, and another guy called a protozoa comes along and eats that bacteria, all of a sudden you have nitrogen. If we manage an organic transition properly, by the end of year 2, that field should cycle 2.5 pounds of nitrogen every 1,000 square feet to that grass, independent of any fertilizer application. That's how we can make budgets and cost outlays go down over time. They've also, Penn State is saying that this is how we should emerging view of soil health, that all this stuff really is interrelated. So it's a very different concept. So when we design these programs, that's what we're doing. We're looking at that, and that, and that, and then bringing it together. Some of you have probably heard the term humus. Humus is technically the end product of decomposition. If organic matter nationally is 5% of soils on average, humus is less than 1% of that. But so powerful because it's a carbon compound, and that's the link that brings this all together. Conventional management, synthetic fertilizer, chemical pesticides, quick fix, product-based, symptom treating, applications by calendar date, multiple applications a year, and generally low mowing heights. Think of the 4-step program as the poster child for synthetic management, where you're doing a pre-emergent herbicide, a post-emergent herbicide, multiple soluble fertilizer applications in the course of a year. Natural management, natural organic product. If we want to reduce pesticides and get them out of the equation, you absolutely have to put away synthetic salt-based fertilizers. A typical 4-step type fertilizer is basically a 50-pound bag of salt. So we all know that salt is not conducive to supporting living organisms, and so we get rid of the salts and we bring in natural materials to deliver nitrogen. We're looking at long-term benefit. That's what Indy was talking about in Springfield, that they saw results in a year and a half, because on day 1, we weren't focused on that first month or 2. We were focused on day 1, 2 years out, and that's what he was talking about. They're reaping the benefits now 2 years out. We're problem-solving strategy as opposed to a symptom-treating strategy, and the objective is to build healthy soil. We begin every project with soil testing, because if we don't soil test, we don't know what's there. Here in New Hampshire, the soils tend to be acidic, they're probably sandy here on the coast. If you have a low pH, fertilizer's not going to work well. If you're deficient in something, grass is going to have a problem. If organic matter is low, then that gets adjusted. So all of that happens with soil testing, and that's really the science. That's bringing the science to the table. Fertilizers. Nitrogen is from urea, synthetic nitrogen. We know that plants can only use inorganic nitrogen, meaning ammonium or nitrate. That's why we went to a laboratory 75, 80 years ago to create a readily available, water-soluble synthetic fertilizer. Fast release, fast uptake. We can slow it down by encapsulating, sort of the same way that sand gets encapsulated. Multiple applications a year, leaves the soil quickly, tied to the petroleum market. Takes 5 tons of petroleum to make 1 ton of this fertilizer. Big petroleum draw. When you put down a synthetic water-soluble fertilizer, it works in 2 days as soon as it comes in contact with moisture. Peak growth rate, meaning the maximum release, is 7 to 10 days after application. That should concern you next to the aquifer, because what ends up happening there is if you irrigate that field or you get a heavy rain event, 50% of that nitrogen's got to wash below the root zone, and it will be into some other place that's undesirable very, very quickly. 4 to 6 weeks after the application, it's all gone, and you have to do it again. Natural fertilizers, nitrogen is, the nutrients are from plant, animal, and mineral source, with the nitrogen specifically from grains or animal byproducts. It's water insoluble, meaning microbes break it down, so it's slow release dependent upon microbial action. Long-term benefit, measured growth, not tied to the petroleum market. The only petroleum involved in this is the transportation to get it from the manufacturer to its end destination. And then we have our cultural practices. We have things that are critically important. Mowing, irrigation, aeration, overseeding. You heard the Springfield talk about that. That's the cornerstone of the program. In a chemical-based program, the cultural practices get overlooked because I can go on a sports field and walk on that and look and see what weeds are there. And I can tell whether it's compacted or not, just by what populations of plants other than grass might be there. We can take a pesticide, a selective herbicide, meaning a weed killer is not going to hurt the grass, and will kill that weed, and take it out of there, and then we can get a synthetic fertilizer to boost that grass. But until we get in there and adopt the cultural practice of aeration and loosen that soil and introduce oxygen, the weed's just going to come back again. We did football fields 15 years ago. They were 35% covered in broadleaf plantain, and 14 months after we started, not a single rosette of plantain left on the property. We aerated, we used organic fertilizer, we overseeded, we did everything that's listed right there. No chemicals at all. So you change the system to best support the plant, then you end up with the desired plant and not the weeds. Pepperdine University, Malibu, California, just show you some pictures. One of my projects, we just finished year one. This is their Division I soccer field. This is Kentucky bluegrass in Southern California that's cut to 1 inch. So you all know you can grow Kentucky bluegrass here in New Hampshire. This is a Division I soccer field. This actually just hosted the Western Regional Finals. There was a team from China that called them up and said, we heard you have the best field on the West Coast. They rented it for 3 weeks. They came over and played and couldn't believe that it was organic. They said it was the best field they ever played on. So this is 1 year into withdrawing most of the synthetic materials. As of 3 weeks from now, it will be basically 100% organic. Boulder, Colorado, just quickly to show you how powerful organic can be. Neighborhood Park, I've worked with Boulder since 2010. Neighborhood Park, same grasses you grow here in New Hampshire. You can see when the before and after pictures were taken, all during the active growing season. No synthetics used whatsoever. They actually didn't want to waste my time on this park. They were going to rip it all up and start again. It was only 6 years old. Very compacted, bare spots, anaerobic moisture puddles. This is what it looked like. Pretty bad. They weren't happy. So we just put it into a minimal basic organic program, nowhere near as sophisticated as Springfield. That's how compacted it was. That's what the club looked like, just all thatch. Minimal density, unhealthy, a lot of weeds, and that's what we turned it into in 3 years. Weeds were replaced by grass because we changed that system to better. That's different than the new construction that you're talking about. But this is taking something that's horrible and making it good. In new construction of an athletic field, there has to be specifications that are written on exactly what soil that comes in there. You have to have testing, you can't leave it to a contractor, just bring in whatever soil they want. The municipality absolutely has to spec it out with a very strong criteria of what is in that soil. Because if you start off with poor soil, you're going to have a problem. If you start off with good soil, you'll never have that problem. Another project in Colorado, 15 months after stopping huge synthetic pesticide and fertilizer use, cold turkey. You may have heard organic is too expensive and it doesn't work, and it means a lot of weeds are going to come in. This is 7.2 acres. And it's weed-free, 1.5 years after stopping everything. One of my fields in Marblehead. This field is softball field hockey visit. I'll actually show you the usage numbers on this. No weeds, it's just grass because it really is just the focus on the soil. Another field in Marblehead, and there's field hockey with the grass in Marblehead, the grass chopped right down to 1.5 inches, 1 3/4. So Springfield, in year one, the cost was $1,740 an acre. We started off with 850,000 square feet, and by year two it was so successful we jumped up to 2.3 million. And they moved it quickly ahead. $1,740 an acre. Year two, we dropped to $1,245 an acre. Year three, we dropped to $1,110 an acre. That's what we project in the beginning, and that's the reality on the way. So that field that Eddie was standing on, that's the cost basis for 3 years on what it took to manage that particular piece of property. If I wanted to do a more aggressive program, and Springfield was one that we were working on as a moderate level program, but when you start to look at things like that Pepperdine, as you move up into higher profile, year 1 could be 2,000 an acre, year 2 1,500 acre, and year 3 1,300 an acre, and that I can absolutely tell you that 1,300 acre is cost competitive dollar for dollar with conventional management. Those prices include all granular applications, all liquid applications, because we are doing liquid soil building applications. A municipality can make a one-time capital investment of $7,000 for a 300-gallon spray tank and fertilize with a liquid product. And my finance committee allowed me to buy that equipment from Marblehead out of my operational budget and not capital outlay, because I gave them a 9-month payback, because the cost of liquid materials was that much cheaper. So this is all granular, all liquid, and all grass seed. Those numbers there, those annual numbers over Springfield, which was 23 acres, we had $16,000 worth of grass seed. And that declines over time as you thicken it. That's part of the organic strategy. Conventional programs don't include grass seed. Conventional programs are fertilizers generally and pesticides. That field that I said in Marblehead, that was that one that I said was phys ed hockey. So as his field use 650 scheduled hours a year. The consultant here in Springfield said 1 to 200. Huh?
Here in Portsmouth.
In Portsmouth, yeah, sorry, yeah, in Portsmouth was 100 to 200. So this is 650 scheduled hours. It has all physical education for the middle school and an estimated 100 hours of non-programmed use. So we're looking at about 1,000 hours on this field. There are no bare spots and there are no weeds. So the idea that grass can be grown strong and resilient and safe without chemicals and support 1,000 hours of use is very doable. And in Marblehead, as we got through the organic program, costs have dramatically gone down to implement things over time. So this really sets aside the myth that if you don't have synthetic or you don't have chemicals, you can't have long-term playability. So then that brings us full circle back to the issue, synthetic versus natural organic. As a turf guy, the Sports Turf Managers Association, a national organization, they came out in favor of natural grass. That was the better option. It was, I can actually provide you with an extensive document that they put together 3 or 4 years ago that looked at the cost of natural grass, that looked at the cost of synthetic. When you are talking about synthetic, you can't focus on that $1 million construction cost. You have to cost it out over 20 years, because the useful life of that field is maximum 10 years. And no matter what a consultant tells you, that is the industry standard, 10 years. At the 10-year point, you rip up that surface and now it's hazardous waste. And you have to pay that disposal cost. You roll out a new carpet. 10 years after that, you have to replace it again. But at that point, the manufacturer will not warranty that surface on that subgrade without the subgrade being redone as well. So now you have all the maintenance for 20 years, you have initial cost, you have replacement cost, then you have a second replacement cost, working on the subgrade. So if you're looking at one football/soccer field, you are probably committing the municipality to a $3+ million investment over 20 years. And that's really the reality on how you cost it out. And we have these cases all over the United States now where all the big manufacturers are being sued for replacement. 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, the fields have failed. And they're beyond the warranty, because the warranty is 3 or 4, and now the municipality's on the hook to fix it. And it's actually ended up in litigation in some cases, but because the industry doesn't want to get a black eye, they're quickly coming in and saying, well, we'll fix it for you, we'll replace it. So that's all the kinds of things that you may have heard, you may not have heard, but that is sort of the reality from somebody that's involved in it, that manages them by default, or not by favor. I was the only elected official in the town of Marblehead to vote not to put in the synthetic field. Everybody else jumped at it. 8 months after it was in there, kids went out with firecrackers and burned a big hole in the middle of it. Big money to replace it. A year afterwards, there was a sinkhole developed, and a whole section of the field on the 30-yard line caved right into the ground. And so that had to be fixed, and that was all stuff, that was under warranty, but that was a manufacturer's problem. So they're not flawless, they're not without problems, they're not without long-term costs. They do give you 24/7 play, but it's the kind of a thing that the injury factor, the other, Swampscott, Massachusetts put one in, and they use the alternative infill, and it gets those cork and coir infills. They get really slippery. 5 days after they opened the field, one kid had a horrific injury because he went to run, stopped short, and everything went out from underneath him, and it was just like sliding on ice. So a lot of issues to think about. I urge everybody to take a good, long, hard look at it, because it really isn't as simple as it appears on the surface. And you know, the idea that now you see that natural grass can work, it can stand that kind of abuse and wear and tear, and it's all about how individually any municipality manage it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip. We're running a little bit over, so I'm going to be very quick. I just have one slide to show you, and then I want to talk a little bit about the precautionary principle. This is the school department they put out a bid for 3 years of services. They also put out a bid for, I think I can show you on this slide anyway. They put out an annual bid for their maintenance of their synthetic field as well. Everybody knows that the football field at the high school is crumb rubber. It's 8.5 years old. And this is a bid that they put out. And this is what they require for maintenance of that crumb rubber field every year. And they're asking for the cost for 3 years. But annually, what they have to do, and this is really important, there's 20 tons, it takes 20 tons of crushed up rubber in very fine granules to make one field. 20 tons. That's 40,000 tires to make up that 20 tons. Well, look at the bottom line there. That struck me when I saw that. I said, my God, they have to put a ton back on the field every year. That's 5%. And then I'm thinking, well, where does that ton of crumb rubber go? Has anybody here ever played on a crumb rubber field? Much? Yeah, me too. And I played the soccer league when they first got them, and everybody thought it was great. But I couldn't understand why I was bringing home these little black particles. They stick on you. And I've talked to mothers that bring their kids home from soccer games. You know, they got the big van, the kids pile in with their cleats on and everything else. And we saw from one of those slides earlier from Rachel what you're supposed to do when you play on the field. You're not supposed to get in the car. You're supposed to take your clothes, go to a shower, get washed up. Even some of these recommendations are to remove your clothes outside of the house so you don't bring that stuff in. You know, we've heard the statistics that, you know, there are 92 dangerous chemicals and 11 of them are carcinogenic. Have you ever been in a tire warehouse before, a tire store?
Yeah, the smell.
There's a smell that you will never forget the rest of your life. Never. But yet, we let our kids play in that stuff. You know, I'm amazed. So we've got a ton of crumb rubber that these kids are taking out of that field every year and bringing home. No one knows at all what the safety of this is. We've heard there's no real definitive studies, long-term studies. You know, we've had the field at the high school for 8 years, but cancer, it takes longer than that for cancer to develop. So we don't know what's happened out there. Basically, the precautionary principle, the definition, was first proposed as a guideline in 1988 at the International Conference of Scientists and Lawyers and others. And said, wait a minute, let's talk about the cautionary principle. And there are 4 central components. And it's taking preventive action in the face of uncertainty. It's shifting the burden of proof to the proponents of an activity. It's exploring a wide range of alternatives to possibly harmful actions, and it's increasing public participation and decision-making. And that's what we're trying to do today, is to educate people and educate our elected officials so that they're more knowledgeable about what they're proposing for the health of our kids. So basically, the precautionary principle comes down to this, and I think that's what happened when the city passed its non-toxic resolution. That why in the world would we risk the health of some kid 10 or 20 years from now when there's safer alternatives? Why even risk it? You can debate, oh, Weston & Sampson says it's safe, they've got consultants that say it is. The EPA won't tell you it's safe. They're studying it now with 2 other federal agencies. So why in the world will we risk anything like this? In fact, you know, I've gotten so ingrained into learning this material over the last 6 months or so, learning about crumb rubber fields. It's frightening to me that the age of these fields, when they get older, the amount of lead that leaches out, the amount of the other chemicals that leach out are much worse in 8 years and 9 years. And it isn't just the infill product either. There's lead in those little grass fibers. You know, this is an unsustainable thing. There's lead in those too. So you have to look at the studies and look at the science. And that's what I'm encouraging people to do, is to look at the science. So I think it's just crazy to take the chance by using anything but a natural organic field. I will say this though, for the record, I am 200% in support of new athletic fields in Portsmouth, absolutely positively. But I think that we have to be 100% certain that it's safe for our kids to use. And I think it's time, I think that if you look at the capital cost of putting in a natural field versus putting in an artificial field, Rusty, I think there's enough money in that budget now that we could put an organic field at the stump dump, and we could replace the field at the high school now, too. That's a danger. That's it. Now, I'd like to turn it over to anybody who has any questions. Yes?
Thank you. So this is a question for you, Chip. In discussions that we've had with city officials over the last 18 months or so regarding the decision about this field, one of the recurring topics that's expressed is that we're really space constrained here in town, and so we don't have space to build the number of fields that would be ideal for our town.
Microphone.
That space constraint ends up, driving up the hours of use is how it's been explained to me. So I think one of the questions is for you is, can you make a comment about hours of use for a natural field relative to an artificial turf field, say in a typical April when there are a lot of lacrosse teams that are itching to get out there and get practicing outdoors?
I'll come to here. So, this is, one thing, I was very involved in this synthetic turf debate like 12 years ago, and there's videos of me all around and everything else. And then one municipality said, okay, because I've always made the comment that an organically managed athletic field is stronger and wears better than a field that's managed with synthetic and pesticides. And that's true, because the organic allows the roots to go down. It's just a stronger system. But then I was asked point blank to say that my organic field would wear just like plastic. So that's really an unrealistic situation to put in. But if I can show you this field that has 1,000 hours of use, the only, and basically, you're not in New Hampshire going to put 3,000 hours of use on a synthetic field. You'd have to play all 12 months. If we get 2 days of rain, the fields are closed because we're trying to protect our capital investment. So theoretically, that would not happen in a synthetic field. If you want to go and play the game in the rain, you could. So that's really the difference. It's not about cumulative hours. It's about the fact that you can beat up this plastic thing to a point, but then again, some point, all that heavy use is gonna make it age faster. So if you put those kinds of hours on there, by the time you do get to that end of the life cycle, you may shorten the time to replace it, because it's all about safety at that point. It's about athlete safety. So that's how I approach the grass versus the plastic. That it really comes down to the playability on grass is better than the playability on synthetic, but you have that 24/7, and you don't have to cancel it in a rain. You can play rain through a rain. So that's really the difference, is that a grass field can stand the wear and tear, but you have to be protective of it.
I'm just wondering what the status is for the decision on this. When is the city planning to make a decision, and what's the process from this point forward?
Sure. I talked to Peter Rice, and he was expecting to issue a bid request sometime next week. They're working on it now. But this issue, according to John Lowell, will be coming back to the city council, because they're looking to budget more money, to get the approval for more money for the field. That the original estimate, I believe, was too low. So it is coming back before the city council. So we're doing as much as we can to educate. I'm disappointed we invited all the school board members, we invited all the city councilors, all the rec members, invited the sustainability Blue Ribbon Committee folks to come as well. So we took the effort here also to tape this. And we're going to try to get this on to the community TV station as much as possible.
I think there's something going on at the middle school, so probably parents didn't come, but I think there is many grandparents here today, there are parents.
Oh, I felt bad about that. There is a Valentine's event. They sell chocolates or something like that. It's a big chocolate festival. And it wasn't on anybody's schedule in advance when we tried to set up this date, and it's so hard to get this room.
And I just want to point out that I'm a member of the school board.
Thank you for coming.
And I'm also the school board representative on the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Sustainability Committee, so I'm kind of wearing two hats, but we are represented here. So,
thank you very much for coming tonight. And please, if you would, like us, Non Toxic Portsmouth, on our Facebook page, because then you get updates as these events go forward in the next several weeks about what's going to happen with the council and when decision points will be, so that you can make your voice heard and be informed. Thank you.